Postgres is a search engine now thanks to PG text search. This implements a feature called BM25, which is what Google has used for a long time on their search engine, but now it works right inside of Postgres just by installing this extension. It's really cool, it's open source, and it's something you can use right now as a lot of teams have already done it. Now, this was open sourced by Tiger Data. They also made TimescaleDB, which of course is a very popular time series database for Postgres. So all you need is Postgres, right? Well, that seems to be true more so now than ever. Now, the idea here is I want to show you how to implement this using Tiger Cloud and a few other tools that just make all of this much faster. We're not going to be writing code here. We're going to be using Claude Code as our development partner, along with Tiger Cloud to implement the PG text search. This is far easier than you might imagine. Let's see how it's done right now. To get started, we need to install an AI agent on our local machine. I'm going to be using Claude Code to show you how this is all done, but there are many other AI agents that are out there that are probably really good, and by the time you're watching this, maybe even better ones as well. I'm going to go to code.claude.com, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the command based on what system I'm on. So I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to grab this command, and then I'm going to open up something called terminal, which would be true for Linux users. If you are on Windows and you use something called WSL, you'll open up WSL. If you're on Windows and you have PowerShell, you'll open that up. Now, the idea is you need to have it open so it looks something like this. If you are on a Mac like me, it's going to be located in your utilities under your applications. At the very bottom, you'll see terminal. Yours might look different than this, but the point is you should be able to say stuff like echo hello world and hit enter, and that should just work. So then the idea is you just copy this command here and then you run it. You hit enter, it's going to download Claude for you. Once that actually finishes, you'll be able to write out Claude -- version and see this. You will not write out some gibberish and see this. If you see this gibberish, you might need to open up a new terminal and type it out, which clears out the session for the terminal itself. Or you might need to look at how you installed Claude, which I didn't actually finish. Well, it is finished now, but you didn't see me finish it. Then the idea is you're going to want to install UV. That installation process is going to be much of the same. So UV is on astral.sh. There's this project called UV, which allows you to manage your Python projects. It is by far the best one out there, and I've been doing this a while. Now, if you don't end up using Claude Code, that's totally okay. There are other AI agents. OpenCode is another AI agent tool that can also use Claude. So it can get confusing from here and there, but the idea is I'm going to stick and make it as simple as possible using Claude. The one big exception is for those of you who aren't ready to pay for this subscription, you then will want to download Ollama. Ollama is how you can run open source models locally, and yes, you can use it with Claude Code. You can just go through their documentation for that and their recommended models. The performance of these is going to be quite a bit different than what I'm going to be using, which is Opus 4.5 from Anthropic Claude directly. So that's what you need at this point so you can actually start the sessions and start building out the code. Naturally, AI agents and a lot of tooling out there can clarify what just happened, what I just talked about. But overall, the idea is you have these two primary tools going forward. This is going to be a common theme for me across the board with building out these projects because these two are fairly fundamental to being able to use an AI agent and also to be able to use something like Python. Let's get our AI agent to set up our Python project. Of course, the way we're going to do this is inside of the command line on the terminal or PowerShell, depending on your system. Now, of course, if it feels like it's out of the 1980s, that's because it sort of is. It was back in a time where keyboards were the only things. You didn't really use a mouse. So we still need to do stuff like that. Now, the reason I recommend this for basically everyone is because all of the code editors that are out there are definitely going to change dramatically. Now, if you want to use a code editor, you totally can. This one right here is VS Code. It can help things a little bit, but you'll notice there's still a terminal in there. You'll still end up using terminal a lot. So we might as well go back to the primitive, which of course is the command line. So the idea here is we just type out the commands that we want to use. In some cases, it'll just be something like echo, hello, world. Notice that I put quotes around the actual text that I'm writing, but if I hit enter, it just says hello world. It's not really that big of a deal. So the idea is we want to get used to these commands and we want to write them in the correct places. So one of the correct places will be for our project in particular. But the thing is, you probably forget what these commands are until you write them all of the time. I have been writing them for a long time, so it's really easy for me to remember some of them. The other thing is, depending on the system you're on, your commands will be slightly different. For example, if you're on Mac, ls works. It lists where things are. If you're on Windows, you might have to do dir and hit enter. That, of course, doesn't work on Mac. Now, these things are changing over time. Windows subsystem for Linux, the ls should work as well as dir, which is pretty cool. But the idea here is the commands we're going to use will help us navigate on our main system to get to a place where we actually want to store our code, because it's like any other files. You might be used to storing things in a documents folder. We're doing something very similar. We're going to store it into a dev folder. Now, the way we do this is not something that you necessarily have to remember at this time. What you should remember at this time is how to open up Claude, how to do the print mode where it's -p, and say stuff like how to create a folder in terminal or PowerShell if you're using that. You hit enter. This will do the standard sort of AI stuff. It will do a quick search for you and show you all of the things. Now, you could ask follow-up questions. You can do all sorts of stuff in there. But using that -p like I just did makes it really easy to just see what the results are and then carry on. Now, in my case, I'm not going to go off of that because I already know what it is. It is makedir, also -p. This is a big coincidence and you won't see it very often. -p in this case is just saying, hey, it's okay if it already exists. You don't need to run any errors, and also make sure that all of the folders exist in the path that I'm creating. So what I want to do is do ~dev/search-engine. So this ~/ is so that it's on my user account and then it's always here. In other words, all of us will be using this same thing regardless of what your username is on your machine. After you do that, you do cd and then the exact same path, just like that. Now you're in that location. If you're on Windows, you'll type out dir. Everyone else will do pwd, hit enter. There is the path. Your path will almost certainly be different than my path. Great. That is some of those fundamentals. Now we'll go back in using Claude again. And now we'll go ahead and say setup Python, maybe 3.12. That's just a version of Python with UV, and create a minimal CLI app using Python. Close it off with another string and go ahead and hit enter. This will start working. Granted, what I just wrote is off the screen now, so it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on. But you can also see up here, it's going to ask some things in there. And if for some reason it's not really working the way you want, just hit Control-C, literally the Control-C, and you'll cancel it out and you'll see something like that. Then you can press up again and just copy this out. Okay? And so I'm going to copy that out, and so I can do echo with those quotes again, and now I can see that exact same thing. Okay, great. So now I actually want to jump into Claude. This right here allows me to jump into Claude and get a very simple result out. Now I want to start a Claude session, which will just be simply Claude, and then we're going to be using the model Opus. Opus is their best model right now, which might change over time, so just keep that in mind in terms of the model itself. I hit enter. This brings me into Claude Code, a Claude Code session. You may have seen stuff like this already. This is definitely all over the internet, at least in the early part of 2026. But the idea is we're going to paste that same thing in, and I'm going to hit enter. The reason we go this way is so we can actually see what's happening. We can see it thinking. We can see all of the things. Then it's going to ask me for things like if we want to proceed on this. And you could go one by one and just say yes. And in some cases, it would be a good idea to understand what's going on with this one by one thing. I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. And I'm going to also look at this first command that it's doing. Now, I'm giving you a lot more detail than you necessarily need to know, but knowing some of these things can be really helpful if you ever run into some sort of loop or some sort of issue with your project. So we see this bash thing here. What is bash? Bash is running commands on your terminal. You could just think of it as that. Run commands on your terminal on the command line. There's more complexity to that than just that. But what I can do here is I can grab this which command and I can paste this in just like that and hit enter, and it does the same thing. So this is one of the magical things about Claude Code is it can run commands on your local machine. This is also potentially very dangerous. So in the long run, you'll probably want to work towards using something like a Docker sandbox. That's outside the scope of what I'm trying to do right now, but this will help isolate any sort of issues because right now Claude can just run any command on my machine. Okay, so what we see next is it runs this bash command and then it's going to ask me to proceed, which I'll go ahead and say yes. And then you can just keep this process going until you have exactly what you need. And what I mean by what you need is you'll say, I want this app to be called TARS. Now I was typing something and then it prompted me with something else. You might think that's lost. It's not. I'm going to just go ahead and say override it. There, we're back into what session I was doing. So it'll interrupt you with questions, which is great. This is the process. You could always say yes and just kind of let it do its thing. But in many cases, you'll probably want to just question what it's doing here. And so I'll go ahead and say yes here. And I want to call this app TARS. So I'll go ahead and say enter. This will queue up to the agent, hey, this is something you should do very soon. So it already said it. If I scroll up a little bit, it'll say, I'll rename this app to TARS and fix the packaging. Super cool. What is packaging? Yeah, I'll talk about that some other time. But I'll go ahead and say overwrite this for now and say yes. And it's just building these things out. Now, I could sit here and talk to you about what it's doing, and I can explain all the code, but a lot of that is just not necessary anymore for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is you could just copy this code right here, and you could open up Claude directly. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go into Claude.ai, and assuming that I'm actually logged in, which I might not be, I could paste this in here and say, what is this? And go ahead and hit enter, and then I'll start to explain it. You probably already know that. It's probably already a familiar process, but from time to time, you might want to do that. And so in my case, I end up saying yes all of the time. I'm sitting here just making sure it's not doing things that I just completely don't understand. I realize some of you might not completely understand what UV sync is, but you can figure that out. It's very straightforward at this point on what to do. So the idea here, though, is you can see all the bash commands. You can see everything that's happening in the code itself. And then eventually it's going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to always allow the code to be accessed by Claude. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes and just run that. And I'll actually go ahead and go through this process a little bit longer off the video. Okay, so it got to a point where it can now start running the CLI, which is pretty cool. And I also see that it says Cooper, which is wild because I called it TARS after Interstellar, which Cooper is the main character. Crazy. I never said anything. I didn't change anything other than what you saw. Okay, so nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and let it run this command, and we'll see what happens. I'll go ahead and do it again and see, hey, there it is. Hello, Cooper. Funny, hilarious. Great. So here is my now command line tool. Okay, so I want it to work everywhere. So how can we make this work everywhere on the machine? I want the dev mode as default for now. So dev mode as default, meaning this isn't production. It's not ready. It's not something anyone else can use. It's literally just for us at this point. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it says UV tool install. Great. That means that it's going to work globally for those of you who are familiar with that. And then now it's going to go ahead and allow me to run this command here. And so there it goes. And so eventually what I should be able to do is open up a new terminal window and write out tars -- version. And sure enough, I don't have -- version, so I'll give that in a second. But I will do tars and hit enter. And there it goes, hello world. If I say tars and Cooper, it says hello Cooper. Fantastic. I'm also going to go ahead and copy this error here, paste it in, hit enter, and see what it says. And so this is going to be the process so much going forward, building out this application. You're going to ask it to do something, an error is going to happen, you're going to ask it to fix it. Now, there's a way to have it loop where it's constantly fixing its own stuff, but if you're wanting to direct it in a very specific way, then this is going to be the process. And so now if I run tars-version, let's see if it works, it now shows us that. This is how quick we can build software now. Gretchen, I'm talking a lot. If you were just like going through it and just saying yes and just kind of thinking through it, it might end up taking a lot longer because it starts making you think, or it might just be way faster, which is super cool. And if I list things out in this folder now, or actually I should say in this folder, let me close out this by doing Control-C a couple times, and then I list things out. I'm now in the project folder, and there it is. If I cd into src, I can see there's tars. If I cd in there, there's not a whole lot going on. We need to change that. But we now have our own Python CLI. It's pretty great. Now we just need to start adding on some features. Let's add a new feature to our search engine that we've been calling tars. The idea is, of course, to go into where our code is and then write some Claude code commands and see what happens. So the way we do this is we're going to go ahead and navigate to where we stored it, which in my case was on cd/dev/search-engine, hit enter. If I do an ls here, I should see something like this. And of course, I could go into Claude and ask what's going on. But instead, what I'm going to do is say, hey, Claude, I want to be able to add links like tars, add link. Can you make that happen? The link should be stored in a CSV file. That's it. So this will take a moment. I'll tell you the thinking behind a CSV file. That is comma separated values. So it's meant to get closer to like a spreadsheet or a database. CSV files are the lowest level of that. You might store it in Markdown files as well, but we'll stick with just CSV files to have some structure so we can make changes over time. I'll go ahead and allow edits for this one. While that's working, I'm going to go ahead and grab a link. The link I'll grab is for the code documentation for PG text search. Okay. So now it looks like it's there. That was fast. Let me go ahead and open up a new terminal window. I should be able to now do tars add that link. There it goes. So you notice that it is working. Okay. So how can I list stored links? This would be another feature. It'd be a logical question like, oh, how do I check them? Right? Then it will go ahead and create that feature for us to see what they are, right? And let's go ahead and see what that is. Looks like it's done. There we go, tars list, and there we go. So if I were to add it again, list it again, now it duplicates. I don't want duplicates. There we go. And so what you might imagine here is we could continue to add more things to what a CSV file could do. And I encourage you to do that. The point here is more of how do we add some data and add some structure, because this will allow for us to go even further. Okay. And so right here, I also want to maybe say something like clean up list by some command, maybe tars clean list, something like that. You'll get in this habit of just going back and forth until you get what you need. Now, in my case, I'm going very, very small and very specific to slowly iterate up as to what this project can do, right? Because right now, it doesn't do a whole lot, and realistically, it's very simplistic, but it's getting us in that slow and steady mode, right? So now, clean list, now it just removed them. Oh, no, I want it cleaned of duplicates. So this did something really good, and I'm glad this happened. I didn't anticipate it, but it deleted everything. And so this is where those safeguards start to come into play, and where you might think about, oh, what you're saying to this thing can have catastrophic event on your entire system. That's why sandboxes have become very, very popular, is because then it won't touch anything else on your system. But in our case, I went ahead and redid it. Let's go ahead and add this up. I'm going to try and add it again. It says it exists. Okay. And then we try to do clean list again. No duplicates. So maybe we just go ahead and say, it's fine, add duplicates now that we can clean them. Right? You can kind of go back and forth on that as well. But with this, we actually want to take it another step further, which would be actually storing this data and doing it in a way that makes sense for what a search engine would do, which of course is scraping the data. Markdown has become the de facto standard for giving AI agents documentation. I'm going to show you this in just a second, but the reason for it is because of how it formats a document. So if you think of something like Word or Apple Pages or even TextEdit, when you go in here to format something, it's going to store it in a very specific way. This way might be friendly to an AI agent. It might not be. Markdown is always friendly for that because it's developed for the internet. It was developed so that anybody could write some very simple things to have really impactful stuff. So if you look up a Markdown cheat sheet, for example, you can see what a header looks like. This is how you write a header that's like this, this, and this, right? So Markdown, what a person would write is this versus what the alternative is, which I'll show you in a moment. And then you get some really cool results here. Now, the thing is also true for things like links, right? So right here is what you would write in Markdown. What gets rendered is this right here, assuming you have something to render it. That is wildly different than something like TextEdit. A big part of the reason that you see things like VS Code is because old editors like Microsoft Word, Apple Pages, or even TextEdit were never formatted for writing code. They were never designed that way. Markdown is a really good in-between between writing actual code and writing documentation. This is why you see it everywhere. And it's also why AI agents thrive with it. Now, the alternative to Markdown is HTML. So every web page ever uses HTML. But what you're starting to see a lot more of is this copy page as Markdown. It's happening everywhere. But even this web page right here, if I were to go into view page source, what ends up happening is it will open up a page that looks like this. This is HTML documents. A server will send this to your browser renders it and makes it look pretty like that. Whereas Markdown doesn't need nearly as much heavy load to be rendered out. That's why you'll see it on things like Reddit. Markdown's all over the place there for that exact reason. So the real question here is, how do we scrape content for AI agents? Well, we scrape it and then format it into Markdown. If Markdown's available, we would actually use that Markdown as well. So let's see this as a very simple example for the documentation for PG text search. Now, you can use any docs here, but I want to actually just get one value in here. So I'm going to jump into, I'll do tars add. I'm going to add this link in, right? So now tars links, or list, I think I called it. There we go. We've got a few examples in there. And then I want to do tars clean list. I think that's what we called it. And then tars list. There we go. Only a few links in there. And now I want to do maybe tars remove this one. We don't have remove. So we might want to add that feature at some point. But the thing here is I want to go ahead and do tars list. And now I'm going to go ahead and say Claude. I'm going to jump into Claude. And I'll go ahead and say use tars list to extract the links that are valid and output Markdown files from the data on those links. And we'll say something like to docs or something like that. We'll figure that part out later. The main thing is I want to see if it can use our new tool. There it goes using it. Then I want to see if it will actually go through all of those things and then fetch this data. So what we see it's trying to do it, it's saying fetch. This is just a simple command to look things up. I'll go ahead and say yes, yes, and yes. One of these is valid. Like the first two are not valid. It should sort of know that, but it doesn't. So we're just letting it do its thing. The last one is definitely valid, and it looks like it actually extracted this data. Now, there is a possibility that the content does not go through. This is one of the downsides of the built-in search feature. We'll have to look at what this means very soon, but I just want to see what this output is so we can actually start doing the scraping example. Okay, so the output's looking pretty good. I'm going to open up another terminal window here. I'm going to go ahead and navigate into my dev folder. I'm going to navigate into my search engine here. And then I'll go ahead and navigate into my docs folder. And now I'll just do cat. Cat is a command that's built in to your terminals. So if you list things out and do cat and then this file here, you will see what it got. And so this may or may not be really good data. I think it's probably missing some things in here in terms of the actual content, but it did perform web scraping. Now, the reason it's missing content, it has nothing to do with Tiger data, but rather a JavaScript heavy site. That means that it will load over time or progressively. That needs something different. Whenever you see a web page that can't be fully accessed, it's usually one of three reasons. So if you see something like this, the main article could not be fully extracted. The first reason, one of the biggest reasons for modern websites, is simply JavaScript. So the web page loads, JavaScript does something, and then finishes the loading of that web page, which might mean formatting for the documentation. It might be loading the documentation. Overall, that slight delay, you might not notice going to it yourself, but computers will. So that web scraping accounts for that slight delay. Another one would be it's behind a password protected page, like you actually have to log in to see it, or it actually could have some sort of bot service that's blocking you from seeing it, which we'll probably start to see more and more. But in the case of Tiger data, I know they probably want this scraped mostly because there's this copy page as Markdown. So they actually want people grabbing this data. There might be more efficient ways to do it in the long run, but what we're about to do right now is one of the best ways to do it. And that is by using a MCP called Playwright or Agent Browser. Now, what these two do under the hood is open up a web browser like Chromium, like quite literally a web browser. I'm in Chrome right now. Chromium is what underlies Chrome itself. So it opens up a programmatic web browser that then Claude can control through this MCP. So the MCP is really just a way that Claude could say, hey, open up this web page. Hey, wait for a few seconds. And then, hey, go ahead and grab this one section. That's essentially what we're trying to do. Chromium is a programmatic way to do that. Now, historically, this has been around for a long time. You would have to write out a bunch of your own code that would then open up the web browser and then allow you to try to do some scraping. It used to be pretty tedious and very hard to do. Now it's a lot easier because of these MCPs that you can choose. Now, I'm actually going to just go with the Playwright MCP. This one's probably a little bit easier for most of us to get installed than the Agent Browser. But in the long run, I would say go check out the Agent Browser. It's a little bit better than the Playwright one, even though they both run on the tool called Playwright, which of course gets confusing. But what we want to do now is we actually need to install Playwright on our machine. So if I were to scroll down here, it's going to give me an installation process for Claude Code. It's right here. So if I grab this and then open up my terminal, clear this out here, I should be able to run this basically anywhere. I don't need to be in a specific browser necessarily. But what I end up seeing here is I added this in here and notice that it's going into this page right here and then in this project. So maybe it's in the wrong spot. Maybe we should change that to go back into where our actual project is. And now I'll go ahead and run this. It looks like it already did it. Okay, great. So we're in good shape. But the thing is, I already have NPX installed, and I probably already have Playwright installed on my machine as well. You might not. So the requirements here are Node.js 18 or newer. So let's go ahead and install Node.js with Claude. We'll go ahead and say install Node with NVM, then make sure NPX is working. Again, you might not know what these things are. I can explain them, but the idea then is we got Node here, and then we've got NPX here. You might say install Playwright as well. You might say a few other things. I would imagine you'll run into issues with this command if you've never done it before. But once you get it up and working, it's going to be so nice for you. So I'm going to go ahead and install that, just run those things through. And what we should end up seeing is the ability for Claude to actually work. So in my case, it actually is doing the same installation that you would actually have. Same thing. You can audit it as you see fit. You could also do it manually and not use Claude, but assuming that you haven't done this before, you would use this. And so there we go. I got everything set up. It's all ready to go. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and say use Playwright to scrape the links from tar's list, right? And so I'll let that run. Notice that it got a little confused. It's like, hey, I don't know what tar's list is. We need to fix that at some point too. But of course, it's looking through my project. It sees the cell I tool. Can you provide the URL of tar's list? Use tar's list as a CLI, then get the URLs from it. Something like that. Again, we need to explain this. Why doesn't Claude Code know this already? Because every session you give it won't necessarily automatically know all of the things. But I'm just going off of what's available to us, and I'll just go ahead and let it do its thing. And so there it goes. It gets the list again, and then I'll just let it finish off. Notice now it's saying Playwright instead of what we saw before. So I'm going to go ahead and say, don't ask for anything in here. I'll just go ahead and say yes. And then now, notice it opens up a web browser. So quite literally, this is a brand new web browser that I didn't touch. It's just doing it. Like I can lift my hands up and it's just working. So this is modern web scraping right here. It's opening up a web browser. It's going to look at that web browser. It's going to extract the data. It's going to wait for things to finish. And then it's going to even run a bunch of different commands in here. Right now, what it's saying, hey, is evaluate JavaScript, like run some JavaScript on this web page for us. Sure, let's go ahead and do that. Evaluate JavaScript. So that's happening behind the scenes. We don't see it because it's doing it with the programmatic interface that Chromium allows for. But once this is all said and done, I can go ahead and say yes. And what I'll end up seeing most likely is better docs. So I'm going to go ahead and just let that other one run in the background there. I'm going to go ahead and jump into docs again. And then we'll just do cat pg-text-search.md. And let's see here. Looks like it didn't update this file. Okay, so we need to scrape the article and save it to @docs for the page or something. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so the old one was still there. And this @docs here, this is like, we could explain this a lot more, but that's the folder path itself. Okay, so I might have to do it again because I didn't give it very good instructions before. I just said scrape the data. I didn't say where to put it. I didn't do all those sorts of things, which maybe you caught, maybe not. But notice it's doing example too. So let's go ahead and go back into cat example domain.md. And so there you go. It's just an example website, not a big deal, but it is showing you some key information, even though there's not a whole lot. And then we'll do cat pg text search. We'll probably have to wait a little bit for this to finish. And look at this. The existing file has placeholder content, right? So again, it's working, it's understanding the context, it's doing things really, really effectively for us. Now, Claude Code is one of a few tools that do this. It just happens to be one that performs really well right now. And you can imagine doing this same idea on multiple pages. It might take a few minutes, but if you start to build up your own engine and database, well, guess what? You're going to have all this stuff just there. Every once in a while, you might need to refresh it and make it better, of course, just like Google does. But the idea is we are getting to a place where, hey, we almost have a bunch of content in here. And so what it's asking me now is to override this page. Notice that it already has stuff that's way different than what I saw before, which is great. So it's showing me all the configuration, all of the documentation. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and then it's going to go ahead and finish. It's going to take only a few more seconds in here. I'll go ahead and close the browser, and then I'll go ahead and do that cat again, and there is my new article. And if I scroll up, it's quite a bit bigger. So let's clear it out and just run that again, and you can see that is quite a bit more data than it was before. And naturally, I could always go back to that web page and kind of compare and contrast as to what's going on. Is it going to be perfect every single time? Of course not. What would be better in the case of Tiger Data in particular is to copy this page as Markdown. So that would be the next question. You could then go ahead and say, does that page have an option to copy as Markdown? If so, wouldn't that be better? If so, do that, right? Simple things. Now, this part, we can start getting to the process of where this is more automated, where it's like, hey, go scrape this, and then Claude knows what to do. But at this point, we're not really quite there yet. We will be soon, but what is going to happen is it's going to wait. It's going to go ahead and find it. Let me scroll and find it, and I'll go ahead and allow it to press key commands and see if that ends up working. And maybe this gives us better data for it. Now, the one thing about this in particular is if there is a copy button for Markdown, maybe it's missing some of the context that you actually might want. Maybe there are other pieces on this page that you'd want to extract, in which case you wouldn't do this part. But to me, I think most documentation is trying to get really good at this copy Markdown button thing. So I would imagine this will be really good going forward and a key part of at least scraping more of like the technical documentation that you might need. Adding new features is going to be really easy. First off, you just jump in and do Claude, and we need to add in, of course, some sort of feature to remove any item. So we need to be able to remove items, right? And so as soon as we do that, it will get to work. We also need a timestamp for when it was added and last updated or scraped. Something like that. And of course, you can chain these things together and then it'll get to work. I'll let it finish. And of course, while it's working, I will say, what is a timestamp exactly? It's a lot more explicit of a number than just like a date or a time. It's more precise of a number. Timestamps are really good for that. And so this is creating now a function to do that timestamp, which is really easy. I'll go ahead and let it finish off. So while I was building, I noticed something pretty nice. We see that I said to, remove things and add some new fields in here. It absolutely already updated what we've stored before. So inside of that CSV file, it now has some updates for that with a header, with added at, updated at, and all of that. Granted, it doesn't have any default data, but it did update that, and I didn't even ask it to do so. It just knew to do that. Okay, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and say remove domains that are not a real one or something like that. And what this hopefully will do is automatically use tars. It looks like it is. So it's going through the list and it's doing that. And so what we want to work towards as well is no more hopefullys. We want to get rid of the hopefully so that it actually works correctly. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and exit out of here with Control-C a few times. I'll go ahead and do tars list. And now I see these listed items out, and there we go. And so as it stands right now, I might want to come back in one more time and say, use something better for output. Like, let's make the output in the CLI better. Because right now it's not very good. It just is like kind of hard to see what's going on. And what I think it's going to add is something called rich. So rich is a formatting tool for CLIs. And what I'll say is, should we use rich, something like that. Now, I just know this, right? You might not know this. It might already do it automatically too, but we'll leave it as that. And I'll just call this one done in terms of what it is that we're trying to build at. You're going to see errors happen all of the time when you tell it to do something and then it just does it, but it doesn't necessarily fix everything. What I do is I copy this, go into Claude again, and then just paste in that error. And so what this will hopefully end up doing is, of course, solving that error itself, which I think it will. But the idea overall is you will see errors like this throughout. So what we'll need to do over time is actually fix this and make it work. I'll go ahead and say this is a global tool, not just this project. As you recall, I told it to do it globally, which is part of the reason that this is having issues altogether. And so one of the other ways that we can start solving problems is by actually initializing a Claude project. Up until this point, we've had a pretty generic approach to using the AI agent. In other words, it didn't have to be Claude. Now we're going to do something that's a little bit more Claude specific at this point. Other agents do have this capability, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what it is with Claude. And that is just making a claude.md file by doing init. So /init, hitting enter. What Claude's going to do is read over what we have so far in our current directory, our current project, and then start to make some general rules for it. And I want to say something like, remember, it's installed globally as a UV tool. Now, again, you're not going to necessarily remember that, but this is something that you'll want to have in there also. That is mostly so that we can build on top of this later. And so if you were to use something like OpenCode, you would do something very similar where it would actually create agent.md. So I'm going to go ahead and say make a file to work with OpenCode as well as Codex, right? Which I believe both of them use the agent.md file, but you can always tell Claude or any of the agents to help support where other things are. In this case, it's not agent.md, but rather agents.md. So I'm going to go ahead and save that file. And so this file itself is a Markdown file. You know, it's that thing. And so what it ends up doing is it'll start giving some general description as to what's going on, which of course you can open up this folder. So let's go ahead and open this dir or directory or folder. That's funny. I didn't put a Y there, but I think it'll open up this file. It's going to ask me if I want to open this up. I'll say yes. Now, I mean, it's kind of silly to ask it to open up this folder when there's a lot of ways around it, but I'll still do it. And so what we see here is the file itself. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in my code editor just so you can see what this looks like, and I can zoom in really easily. And of course, you can review this as you see fit. But the idea here is we've got all sorts of stuff that's going on with this project. So this is really cool, but what it's not really doing for us is starting to make the plans in the long run. So I want to show you another technique I use in order to start really building out this project, or at least the ideas I have for it. For most brand new projects, I would actually start here where I would create a Markdown file that gives some general specifics about the project. Then I would move into this interview mode. So let's take a look at what I mean by this. So first off, I'll jump into Claude, and then I'll go ahead and say read at claude.md and the code base, then use the ask user question tool to interview me about this project. When done, create at spec.md for where this project is going and what we need to do. The ultimate goal is to have a search engine powered by PG text search and Tiger Data's cloud. Something like that. There's a lot of reasons for this in particular that, of course, you can modify as you see fit, but mostly using PG text search. And so Tiger Data's cloud is just a really easy way to do that. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and grab this ask user question tool, or at least Claude is going to go ahead and use it. Now, this process, I've had it where it's taken 45 minutes, literally, for me to go through it, but it asks so many good questions that really help shape where this project can go versus what we've been doing up until this point, right? Of course, you can still sort of go off of vibes and add features as you see fit, but building out this will at least force you to think about all of these things. It might not even be used in the future, like this spec.md file. Yeah, maybe you use it in the future with Claude, maybe not. Either way, this will ask you really good questions about your project. What content will be users searching? Will TARs crawl scrape the links and index their content, or manually add searchable content alongside of links? Both things, of course, right? What are we going to do? Well, initially, it's probably going to just be a command line tool, but eventually, maybe it's all three of these things, and maybe even an MCP server. Maybe it's something even better. To me, it's like, hey, build out the proof of concept for yourself. Solve this problem for yourself first before you move on. A big part of the reason to use Tiger Data's cloud is, of course, PG text search comes in with it, but also, if you ever want to deploy this to the internet, even if it's just for you, having that like cloud-based service makes that really easy to do. And you could do it like that without migrating any sort of data, especially if you build this out and make it huge. So nevertheless, I'm going to go ahead and say we're just doing the CLI first. And right now it's just for personal use, but eventually maybe both. So both at some point. That's it. And so it seems like the interview's done. I went through a few questions, but it's far from done. It's going to now take what you just answered and ask you some more questions. And so I'll let you go through this because, like I said, it can take 30 to 45 minutes to just do that. And me thinking through this on a video, I'm not sure if everyone wants to see that. If you do, let me know. But overall, go through this interview process. It's going to be really powerful for you in building this stuff out. Now, I will say, if you're not fully ready to use the cloud version, you can absolutely use this on all sorts of Postgres instances and install it yourself. So you could use something like Docker to do that, which it might even ask you about. But feel free to go through this process and see what you come up with, because this will help inform other things you might want to do in the future. Tracking changes with your files is something that's highly recommended for all software. You might already know this and you might already know about Git, but if you don't, let me just show you what you're going to want to do. You'll jump to github.com. You're going to create an account, log in, press the little plus here, go ahead and grab new repository, and you're going to go ahead and name it out. The owner will be your username. One of the things that you might want to think about is the visibility. Like, do you want everyone to be able to see this or no one? Private is what a lot of you might end up picking. I already created one for my project. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy these commands here. I'm going to just go ahead and copy the whole thing. You can press this button even, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into Claude and say, I need to do this. Paste that in, hit enter. It's going to go ahead and read that and be like, great, I'm now going to go ahead and do that for you. In the past, I would show you exactly what to do, but right now, I actually would much rather have this do it for me. Now, before I actually say yes to anything, I'll go ahead and say no and make sure this won't cause errors. Otherwise, yes. Right? And so sometimes you might have to jump in and be like, hey, are you going to cause errors with anything? Maybe, maybe not. Overall, the problem here that you're facing is really a problem of version control. Once you actually implement Git, then you're good to go. Okay, so add everything and push. That's what I'll say. Now, push means to push it to GitHub. Take all the code that you have in here and just push it to GitHub. And that's it. And so very soon, what you would end up seeing is all of your code right in that new repository that you would have just built. Notice that it does say co-authored by Claude, which I don't love to have. So I'm going to go ahead and say, no, never say this. I think it's probably fine to give it credit, but I'm not always going to be using that one. And so I'm going to just go ahead and say, don't say that ever again. In which case we'll go ahead and say yes, and make sure you know to never do that again. Oops, I'll go ahead and let that go in Claude.md or something. All right. Make sure that it does it, and we'll see if it does. Nevertheless, it should have pushed some of the code. I refresh. There's all my code on here. And also spec.md, which we'll look at in just a moment. But the idea overall is you would get in a habit of pushing these things up, and I'll go ahead and make some edits, and then I'll go ahead and push the changes now, and there we go. And so back into Claude.md, it'll probably have some of that stuff for me. And let's see if it does it. Oh, it's asking for those things again. And here we go, refreshing. I realize I'm doing a lot of jumping back and forth, mostly because I'm trying to just see what's happening with Claude.md. There it is. Cool. It's not there anymore. And now I can continue on. Going forward, you're going to want to say something like save and push. The actual term is commit and push, but more than likely, you'll do save and push. Both actually will be understood by most AI agents at this point. There's still a better way that we'll get into, but for now, this is good. If you go to cfe.sh/GitHub, it will take you to my Coding for Entrepreneurs profile there. which you'll be able to find the Build a Search Engine with AI Agents repo. You can always search for it in my repos as well. The point being, open this up and let's go through the spec.md I created. There's a chance that you'll just copy this exact spec if you didn't go through the interview. I went through the interview and this is what I got. It only took me 15 minutes or so instead of the 40 that I mentioned, mostly because the state of the project right now isn't that complex. So the idea here is grab this and bring it to your local project. Now, before we do, let's actually talk about it, what's going on. It has this target architecture here where we've got our TARS CLI, which is what the search engine is named at this point. It's going to go to Tiger Data Cloud with PG text search. That's the key here. Eventually, we might want to expand this, but right now, that's the one we're looking at. I also thought, hey, maybe we should keep links.csv as a local offline version if for some reason our internet's down and we can't connect to the cloud. I still want to be able to add links at least. I don't actually know if I would end up doing that in the long run, but it was something that came up in the interview, so I just kept that. Okay, so the idea is it now has a data table here. You don't have to know anything about this other than, hey, here are the columns it's going to track and eventually put into our database. Then the search vector composition. I don't actually know if these things are right yet because I haven't gone through it and I haven't even checked it against the documentation for PG text search. That's okay. That's something we're going to work towards. And then it's got some of the commands in here, and then eventually we'll have the search engine, and then finally the environment variables. Okay, so what we want to start doing is we want to start improving this. We want to start going through the phases. So that interview process actually created some of these phases for me, which is pretty nice. So I could just go based off of what's going on here and make all of this happen, which I think is pretty cool. So now what we want to do is actually use Claude to start implementing some of those phases. So open up Claude Code. Again, in this case, we can absolutely use that same spec file with open code, with codex, and just say something like read at spec.md, and let's start building. Now, I just read that it said phase 1, right? I did not direct it to do this. It did it on its own. So I'll go ahead and say, let's start building phase 1. Now, a more advanced user of AI agents would say, spin up like 3 agents to build this at spec.md. You could totally do that. But the thing is, the spec as it stands right now isn't really designed to handle 3 agents. You could use that interview tool again, that ask, let's go ahead and proceed here. You could use that ask user question tool once again to redefine spec.md for the AI agents. Now, every once in a while, you'll start to see some weird formatting going on inside of your terminal here. That's what we're seeing here. It definitely happens a lot, so keep that in mind. But overall, what we've got here is now a specification that we're going to build towards. This is something that we could audit, of course, but the key is that we have something that we're going to build towards and something that we'll end up building off of. So, of course, at some point, it's going to say, hey, you need to update some environment variables, some actual secrets that we'll end up using in our project, which, of course, we will do very, very soon. But overall, this will implement that plan. It will do everything. It might take a few minutes for that to happen. So go ahead and go through that. You could go through all of the plans at this point as well. I'm going to go through them little by little and make sure that I actually implement all of the features I might want. We're now going to create our Postgres database instance on Tiger Cloud. This is already optimized for PG text search as well as other AI features you might want in your Postgres database. We'll see some of them, but the point here is we need to absolutely bring in our own database instance. So to actually start provisioning this, you could go to my link. If you go to my link, I get credit for you going. That's it. Otherwise, you can go to tigerdata.com and just use that. So the link will be in the description, or you can use this one right here in the video. Once you get to this link, you'll go ahead and log in with your credentials. You'll be able to use the free version of this, as you'll see me doing in just a moment. But of course, the idea is we get this going, and then we're going to go ahead and provision our own database here with timescale DB and the vector extensions. So creating our first database service. This I'm going to go ahead and call it my TARS DB search engine as the service name, and I'll just go ahead and create it. Now, this might take a moment or so for this to fully build out. And of course, you can also download your .env file if you want to download it directly from here. I'm actually going to have Claude help me out with this a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and set my own connection string. Now, keep in mind, this is like a password because it has a password on it, right? So what you've got here is quite literally one of the passwords for it, which is this right here. That's the password to this database, which you can also see over here. Now, normally you wouldn't have your video going and people wouldn't necessarily see what you can see in my video. But the point is you want to treat this as a secret. So how we do that on our local machine is we actually create something called a .env sample for the database connection string. So open up Claude, go ahead and run that. And so that's going to go ahead and create a sample .env file that we'll look at in a moment. After the sample is done, go ahead and create a .env file as well. Okay. And so I want to make sure never commit .env to GitHub. Can you do that too? It even said it right here. That is awesome. I was telling it to do this as well. We're going to see why in just a second. And then we'll go ahead and do save and commit all files. And push. Great. Okay, so it added it to git ignore, and then the credentials won't be committed to GitHub. It's great that Claude caught that and checked it, because now we'll jump into GitHub and we'll just take a look here. We've got .env.sample, which of course has basically a sample database string, but what it doesn't have is it does not have our .env file in there. So if I were to exit out of Claude here and just clear this out and do cat.env, I see that there's something in here. If I do cat.env.sample, I see that it's the same thing, right? So all I really need to do is change this right here. I need to change it to my actual connection string. Now, you can have Claude do this. That's probably not the greatest idea, mainly because whatever you put into any of these AI tools, it might go to their service and thus exposing your data. So what we want to do instead is we want to do it on our own. And there's many different ways on how you can go about doing this. All I'm going to do here is just say code period. This is going to open up VS Code for me if it was installed. But in my case, that command line tool isn't installed for some reason. I thought I had it installed, but it's not. So let's go ahead and install the VS Code CLI command for code. And so that will go through that process. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you another way to do it in case you don't want to write it that way. That is open up VS Code, grab the folder that you're working in, which in our case is this search engine folder, which is in users, user dev, and then into my search engine project. And then I can just open that up as well. And so in here, I mean, you might work in here every once in a while. You probably won't that often. But of course, if you want to see the code itself, this is a good way to do it. In the case of the .env file, this is a great place to actually store our actual connection string that we would have gotten from Tiger Data's cloud instance here. And so I'm going to go ahead and now copy this one, and I'll bring it in, and we're going to go ahead and paste it right here. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and skip the installation process for VS Code. I'm not worried about that so much. Let's go ahead and jump into Claude once again, and we'll go ahead and say, now I have .env updated. Let's start getting our database side working. That's it. Now, in many ways, I'm assuming that it's going to go ahead and review the actual project itself, the code itself. Okay, so right off the bat, though, we got this. And it's quite literally looking at that .env file. So that's not great. That, in many ways, is exposing this to the outside world, which, of course, is not what I want. So what do we do here, then? Well, that's when you might want to start using something like Doppler, which Doppler allows for this cloud-based secrets management. I think it's a great tool for this, so Doppler.com, where you can then store these on Doppler versus directly in your local.env. That's something you'll probably want to do long term. I'm going to go ahead and run this again. This might need to, you might need python.env to load it. I'm just saying yes. I'm just hitting enter to make all of this work, because right now I don't think it has the ability to load in those environment variables, which is why I said python.env. I know that Claude would eventually get there, but I'm just sort of directing it to make sure that it ends up working and it works correctly for this one. Okay, so the keys here though is eventually we'll probably want to update claude.md to never open up .env file, like to make that something it just won't do. So then we could make sure our connection string is in there. And while you're testing this out, I think it's totally okay actually that Claude has access to this. But in the long run, you're probably going to want to change that to all of the things we just mentioned. Okay, so now what we got is the database is fully working. Great. So that's a good start. The actual extension is not working as expected. So this means we're going to need to do something different than what's here. So I'm going to go ahead and just say, no, let's stop for now. And in which case I'll just close out Claude. I'm going to open Claude back up and I'll go ahead and say commit all file changes and then push. Let's go ahead and test out adding in some data. So if I do tars add and then do something like python.org, hit enter. Hopefully what it did was actually add this. And then if I do tars list, I should probably see this data in here as well. Now I do want to check this data, of course, but one of the things I do notice is the actual stored data isn't formatted as a link. So maybe I just say inside of Claude, ensure that links are formatted correctly when added. Add the necessary data to ensure it. Something like that. Now, jumping into the Cloud console, all I want to see here is that the data is coming through. So go into my data view here. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the schemas, this little tab right here, where you'll see stuff like AI public timescale functions. Go into public, go into your tables, and you'll see the tables here for links. And you can press this little table icon and that will do a quick query for you. And what it shows us is there's a few examples of this data that should actually match what we had back over here. And so, yeah, that is a good sign. Things are actually working. My local CLI is now connected into the actual database itself. Not really that surprising that that worked, but what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit better. And the way I do that is by, first I'll navigate over into my dev folder again, and then into my search engine. While Claude is working on the other one, I want to go ahead and say something like tars and see what my options are. So I've got add, remove, update, clean list, search. It doesn't look like I have scrape in here. So if I do tars and scrape, yeah, it's not in there. So maybe we need to actually bring it in, and that's probably something we'll want to do. What if I do tars search and something like Django? See what that does. I get this error here. Now, the reason for this could be many different things. Stuff I'm not actually going to go in through right now, but rather I just want to solve this. Now, there's a couple of ways on how we can think about solving it. Number one, we could grab the actual documentation itself. This is aside from the scraping process, but rather solving this problem. We could grab this documentation and feed it directly into Claude itself. So if we go back into Claude, I'll let this side finish, and I'm actually going to open up another instance of Claude while that's finishing. But I'll go ahead and jump in here and do Claude. And so one of the options you have would be to go to the documentation, copy that Markdown file, which is behind me, but copy that file or copy this whole page, paste it into Claude and say, fix the PG text search stuff right now. Now, that will probably work, but it's a little manual and it's not great. So instead, what we want to do is we want to use the MCP, or the Model Context Protocol, called pg-aiguide. Now, this is not meant to confuse you with the Tiger CLI, which also has an MCP server, but that is for your Tiger Cloud stuff. This right here is for Postgres documentation. And there's a lot more stuff to it than just this, but I'm going to go ahead and go off of this one right here. I'll copy this, and then we'll go ahead and exit out of Claude and just write out this command here and go ahead and hit enter. And so now we've got this MCP server here. So if I go back into Claude itself, what I should be able to see, hopefully, is that it has this server itself. So if I do a quick search for skills or /skills, I don't have any skills there. What about /plugins? We look at that. Here are some plugins that are in there. If I hit tab over, I can see installed. And there is my pg-aiguide in there. And the Playwright one is installed as well. And then naturally, there's also marketplaces and all sorts of stuff like that. So hitting exit will allow me to go out of here. Now we need to fix the Postgres stuff. Use pg-aiguide. Something like that. And so we probably want to use pg-aiguide in general across the board. But let's go ahead and just see if this ends up working out for us in terms of getting the actual database stuff in place and working correctly. I'm going to let this part finish on this version of Claude, and then we'll jump into our other one, which I think is done now. Looks like it is. I'll close this session out. I want a fresh session for what I'm about to do, which is I want to actually have Claude, implement a crawl function that uses Playwright to scrape the web page link from our database. Something like tars crawl -- all or something like that. And then it'll go one by one, or at least I'm assuming it'll go one by one, and then make that. We can make sure it goes one by one, and maybe have a flag for missing or old to make it more efficient. Okay. With that working, I'm back into my Postgres stuff, and let's go ahead and run this again. I'm going to go ahead and allow it to do all of the things so that it can start actually getting all of this working and ideally fixing the PG text search stuff. Okay, so it's asking me for stuff. It also did say this right here. A bunch of issues with this. Now, I actually don't want to answer these just yet. It did ask me them, but it wasn't prompting me for answers. So in that case, I'm just going to let it go. Let it keep going. If it asks me directly, similar to like that interview process, then I actually go ahead and jump in. But it already has a bunch of work that it needs to do in order for it to work correctly based off of what we had before. And so now I'll toggle back to that other one where it's going to go ahead and make some changes to the crawl portion, which might actually conflict with this. So it's not always a great idea to do the same exact sort of things on here. But now it's saying, hey, let's test it. Yeah, test it and do a search, something like that. And I'll go ahead and allow some edits. We'll see if that ends up working. I think it will probably not have a big problem. So we've got database. There we go. Let me run init to do it. Looks like that's working. Column added. Let's go ahead and do a search. Cool. With that search, it looks like possibly there's an error. It could be related to the environment. It could be related to what it just did. But it's going to go ahead and fix it. Or at least I think it will. So let's keep going. It's also possible that some of the errors I'm doing over here with the crawling part is certainly causing other issues over here. But I don't know if that's the case. I think they're different enough of things that we're trying to do. One is trying to fix the search part. One is doing a crawl implementation. And so I think we'll be okay. But overall, there we go. We get search results here. It says no content yet. I think I want to have the actual domains searchable as well. And maybe it's actually doing that. I'm actually not positive if it is doing that, but we'll see that very soon. While it's working on this, I'll jump back into that other one where it's doing the crawl stuff. And I'll just go ahead and let it install this by pressing enter. It will automatically run that like suggested command that's there. And we'll see if it actually installs Chromium and makes it all work. Looks like it's using UV, which is pretty nice. I didn't actually have to go and install it myself, which I think it already had a Chromium, but it's doing it again. Great, that's okay. We want to make it work for this project, and UV is a great way to do that. While that's still running, I'm just checking the other one, so I'm just kind of tabbing back and forth. There we go. So now we've got the ability to crawl. I'm not going to do that yet. We will check that out in just a moment because this other part is still working. And so there we go. Negative match. It looks like it's working in terms of a search, even just with the domain name. So that's pretty cool. Good start here. And so I'll let it finish up and then we'll try it on our own with our own tars. Okay, so now we've got some behavior working. Let's go ahead and open it up. I'm going to do tars search Python. Hit enter. Python.org. First one. Excellent. Let's go ahead and do search example. Example. Excellent. Great. Now, with that in mind, let's try the crawl one. I'll go ahead and let the actual tool itself work here and see if we get it. I think we're missing stuff. Like it's just doing title. We probably want to have a few other things on here. So the link and then the contents as well, which I don't know why it's not in there just yet, but hopefully we will find out. And so look, it's fixing the crawl function. It didn't actually listen to me before about storing the links, or at least it didn't update those other links. So maybe the new one actually does work. So let's go ahead and try that with tars. Add tiger, let's do tiger-data.com, hit enter. There it is. It did work on the new ones. Great. So it just didn't work on the old one, which is totally fine. And so we could add all sorts of things here now. So github.com. Now, these, of course, are general links, but if you're doing blog posts, that might be different. So if we go into, let's say, new or Hacker News, I think it's just news.ycombinator.com. Let's just grab something here, which I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. Mouse food. I don't know what this is. I'll go ahead and do tars add mouse food. Great. And so now if I do tars list, I should be able to see a bunch of things on here. And it looks like we've got some more data. Okay, great. So the next step would really be to expand this a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and do this once again. I'm going to close out of Claude, and then we'll do tars and crawl, and then -- missing. Hit enter. Looks like it says Playwright is not installed. I actually have seen this a few times. So for some reason, Claude is not updating the global one. It looks like tars global is not being updated every time or something like that, which is something we would probably want to fix as well. So as you can start to see, a lot of bugs start coming up. You just tell Claude what's going on and you fix them. This is probably very obvious at this point, but nevertheless, it is pretty cool that all this stuff is working in the way that it is. Claude automatically called that one after I sent it in because that was the error I sent in. And now I think I would imagine that it's working. So let's go ahead and jump back in and I'll do the list again. And so now I get all of these different titles in here. Great. So that part's working. Really nice. So what we just need to do now is update this once again for our content. Something you'll come to find is using multiple instances of Claude at the same time, working on complementary but different things, speeds up your process a lot. And I just can't help naturally do it now. I always just want to open up new instances while I'm waiting. And I think many of us will start going this way as well if you're not already doing that. And so the big one now is we need to fix the column for the content for what's going on. So how do we go about doing that? First off, we need to add a column for scraped, crawled content for any given link. We don't just want the title. Are there other things we need? So right off the bat, I ask questions like that because Claude might see gaps that I'm not asking about, even though I have a general sense as to what I'm trying to do. And of course, it's going to go through that. While that's working, I'll open up another instance of Claude, which I have right here. And so I'm very used to toggling between windows, which is why you're seeing what I'm doing right now. Okay, so I'll only have 2 windows open for right now. So there's only 2. Here we go. I'm going to close out the old session that I had here, and I'm going to open this up. And I want to go ahead and review at spec.md and ensure we are on track with this project. Let's go ahead and mark what's done and remove, or maybe let's go ahead and say, and surface what still needs to be done. Optimize it for multiple agents. There we go. While that's working, I'm going to go back over here. And now we've got searches working correctly. Here's a summary of fixes made. And there we go. Cool. So now let's see. Did I cancel out one that I shouldn't have? Let me press up a little bit. And I did say add this column. I don't know what happened here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this real quick. I'm going to close out this one. I think maybe I had too many terminal windows open. I'll go ahead and open up another one. And now I'll do another fresh session of Claude. And I'm in the wrong spot. Okay. Let's go ahead and close that out. And always remember to navigate where you need to go. Opening up a new terminal window into CD, dev, into CD, search, engine, open up Claude, and paste that in, and give it a go. Okay. While that's working, I'll go back into the spec thing, and I'll go ahead and allow all edits during this one, and let that work. So I have 2 things working now, and hopefully we'll get some answers here soon. Great. I think I did accidentally close this one, and I have too many terminal windows open. Okay, so with this in mind, it shows us these things. It says that the main content's in there, but I didn't see anything. So let's go ahead and see why. When I listed things out, I didn't see the content. How can we surface matching content with a search? Okay, and then let's add those other items too. Might as well. To help with search. Okay, great. Letting both of these work. Gonna allow some edits. Okay. Okay, it looks like one of them finished. I'm gonna go ahead and press up a few more times. And now I want to review what's already done on the project. So review that spec and the code. So again, I did the same thing basically as I did before, but I just made a bunch of changes that are now finished, which is cool. So we can now recrawl everything. So let's go ahead and try that out with another terminal window. Now I should be able to do this globally, as in anywhere on my machine, and in which case it should now grab each one. But we get a new error. Cool. So that is a good sign. Oh, it told me to apply these changes. I should have listened to it. I should have read it. I didn't, though. Do you blame me? Okay. So in that case, like maybe I should just, have it do that too. So I'll make those changes and then migrate them. That might be a good idea. But migrations sometimes break things. So in many ways, I'm glad it didn't do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run it again now that it did that. And there we go. So now it's going through and it's going to grab a bunch of this data. So now what I should be able to do is tars search Django. This in theory would bring us the Django project. And sure enough, there it is. Tars search Python. And now, hey, what do you know? It gives me Python and Django. How about we do something else where it's like tars search Python web framework? Interesting. I probably need to put those in quotes. So let's try that again with tars search and Python web framework. I know it's on the border there. And then sure enough, there it goes. This is the search engine part right here. What I just did shows us that. We did Python, we did Django, and then we did Python web framework. Django is number 1, Python is number 2, because that's absolutely the case. Okay. Next up, tars search Postgres. Do a quick search for that. What do you know? Postgres. How about Postgres for AI? Well, we only have one real thing here. What's interesting is GitHub has this as well, mostly because of this right here. So Python and Django, all of the other things I searched for didn't show this at all. So what if we did postgres.org? I think it's postgres.org. postgresql.org. Okay, so let's go ahead and do tars add. And then tars crawl -- missing. That might need to be the default there. Now I'll do that search again for Postgres for AI. What comes up first? Interesting. The original Postgres didn't show up at all, which is probably because of Postgres SQL. But let's see if by searching Postgres itself. And this time it also didn't come up. So that's interesting. I'm now going to grab this and we'll go ahead and say this yielded, yielded only one result when it should be 2. Let's see if it actually tests that assumption out, right? So we got Tiger data. That's accurate. Of course, that's Postgres. It's right there. The next one, it should be something along the lines of Postgres SQL. Review the tars list. Oops, not rats list. Oh, it's already there. What do you know? It sees that. Okay. And so maybe the crawling didn't work or maybe something like that. So let's go ahead and open it up and I'll do a quick tars list and see if we did get that data coming through. If I scroll up here, Postgres is in there. Yeah, so it's actually showing that. So I'm not quite sure why it didn't do that great of a search. But of course, that is why we have Claude. All right. So interesting. So Postgres SQL or postgresql.org doesn't have Postgres in the description. That's shocking. So now it's just doing a better match. Now, there are other ways to improve this as well, right? And we'll look at those. But the point, of course, is that we already have a search engine. We just add some links and then we can go. So that's pretty great. If I do Wikipedia, for example, let's do Wikipedia. And I'll go ahead and grab Postgres in here. PostgresQL. Let's go ahead and add that. Tars add. And then tars crawl. I think, great. The default is already doing missing. That's fantastic. Okay, tars search Postgres. Let's see what happens now. Tiger data, number 1. Wikipedia, number 2. The official Postgres, number 3. Interesting. Now, this isn't actually that surprising to me for a number of reasons. Number 1, it makes sense that Tiger data itself is the most optimized for Postgres, the term of Postgres of these. It also makes sense that Wikipedia would be the next one up because it's very documentation heavy. The actual Postgres website itself, I don't know. It just might not have that much stuff about specifically Postgres. That term. Let's try it with QL in it and do a search there. Again, not surprised about this. The actual domain name is at the highest. It's quite literally the flip. But Postgres, just without QL, is often what so many developers call it, myself included. But of course, you could try these things out. Now, all of these are very similar results. So if we even go into Google and search for Postgres, right, we might see something similar. In the case of Google, it has a lot more things that have been scraped for this domain. It's doing it a little bit different than what we're trying to organize. And then, of course, it does have, a few others on here that we just haven't done. So now, the question that we're solving is not the same question that Google is trying to solve. We are trying to search through our documentation, the things that we care about based off of those links. So we add in a bunch of links, we crawl them, then we search them. And that's what we care about. Of course, what we could build towards is making all of that be fed right into Claude, where we can make Claude actually call these for us, saying like, hey, what's the latest in Postgres? And then it could search our tool and our database as its first order of business. Maybe it could search other things as well, but as we build this out, we will have a very powerful data set of all kinds. I think this is so cool. And so much of it hinges on the fact that PG text search exists. But we can still make it better. Let's see. When we do a search with spelling errors, we want actual results coming back, not nothing, and relevant results at that. So one of the ways that we can make this work is by using vector embeddings. This is actually a process that's really good for AI in general. If you've heard of RAG or semantic search, we're basically going to be implementing that right now, but we're going to do it in Tiger Cloud because it makes it a lot easier. So first and foremost, what I want to have is we'll say tars vector and then some sort of query here that will actually do the search for us. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Claude and I'll go ahead and say that I want to implement to have this using, and what we're going to be using is simply the pg-aiguide from timescale, which of course is Tiger data. But the idea of pg-aiguide is this can be used on all sorts of Postgres itself. Tiger Cloud in particular already has a bunch of that working. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the docs here and I'll go ahead and say something along these lines. And I am using Tiger Cloud, so some of it should just work. Great. So that's it. Now, that's it for Claude. While Claude is working, let's jump into Tiger Cloud and prepare our database for that. You'll see this AI tab here. In this AI tab, you can also find the link to those docs that we just looked at, the pg-aiguide docs. But the idea here is we need to add in an AI API key. Now, in these docs, something you'll also find is other kinds of approaches to do this. So if you wanted to do it locally and use something like Ollama, you definitely could. So you could definitely use like free tools to make this happen. But as soon as you want to start to deploying it to the cloud, then you'll probably need to use any other cloud-based service, which is what we're doing. And so with this in mind, I'm going to go ahead and add in my API key. The one I'm going to be using is the OpenAI API key. You can use whatever other ones that are available here. And I would imagine this is going to grow a lot over time, especially as people request them. But the idea here is we'll use the OpenAI API key, which of course is available on platform.openai/API key. We're going to go ahead and generate one. This one is going to be my tars search engine. And I'll just go ahead and say can delete so I can just remember I'll delete it at any time. I'll go ahead and copy this and then I'll bring it into my Tiger Cloud instance here and paste it in and go ahead and add that API key. Now, one of the huge benefits to having your API key on Tiger Cloud is the fact that when you go to create embeddings and whatnot, what you won't have to remember when you want to use it later is anything beyond just the database connection string. In other words, if I'm going to deploy this, I don't have to remember, oh yeah, I need to get that OpenAI API key. So less points of failure for something like that and something that could be very, very critical to your entire project. So now what it's saying, of course, is create a vectorizer. That is, in theory, what Claude is preparing for us. And it looks like it is. So we've got from AI vectorizer here. So it does have some of the code in there that it's actually working through. And this might take some time. So what I'm going to tell it is just run the commands when you are ready and fix things as they come up. And that's it. I don't really want to spend a lot of time trying to help diagnose this error with it, because what I'm really trying to do is not so much have a vector search, but have a hybrid search where it's using the PG text search as well as the vector search as well. So we'll see that really, really soon, but I just want to make sure this vector stuff's working, so I'll let Claude finish its job. Claude finally finished after some back and forth I did with it off the video, because it was getting certain things wrong, and I'm not quite sure why, but eventually we got it right. One of the things I had to do was feed it its own errors and say fix it, but also remind it what we're using. This documentation, Tiger Cloud, I had to do that a couple of times, in order for this thing to work correctly, specifically for the vector one. I'm not sure why. Nevertheless, it did end up working. And so what we can do then is we can do a search like hiking. So this right here should yield nothing at this point. Of course, if I do Postgres, this should yield something. And then if I misspell Postgres, this should yield nothing. And sure enough, that's correct. Now, all we need to do is our tars vector and Postgres without the T and do a quick search for that. And if everything was done correctly, it did it right. Now, vector search does take a little bit longer here. It does show me Django. This actually does make sense because Django does work with Postgres. But the thing here is I actually want to see something that's wildly different than this. So what I did was I did a quick Google search and I found this hiking one. I'm going to go ahead and grab this hiking one here and I'll go ahead and do tars add that one. Then we need to do tars crawl. There we go. And then I think we need to do something with the vector. So let's go ahead and say how to generate vectors. Shouldn't tars crawl do that too? Right, something along those lines. But either way, we still need to make sure that we are getting vectors in here. And so I'm going to just go ahead and run tars and hit enter and see where we're at. And so we've got DB in here, crawl vector. Vector is just for the search, as we see. So I think it's going to be in tars DB. And it looks like we've got DB vector. There it is. So let's go ahead and try DB vector. That also has that search query, so that's odd. So maybe I should just wait until Claude's done. There it is. Let's go ahead and grab that one. And there we go. And so now it's creating embeddings. It says it's for 10 links, but it looks like it only did one. So that's probably not great. We should probably update that. Nevertheless, we'll go ahead and run this here with our tars vector. And this time I'll go ahead and do hiking gear and hit enter. Now, when it comes to vector searches or semantic searches, it really tends to perform better when it's like a phrase. Hey, I want the best hiking gear for something versus a single keyword. That's where PG text search will shine. And so what we really want to do is combine these things. But now we've got both kind of search engines working for us. We've got a vector search as well as a actual text search, which I think is pretty great. So that alone actually helps us a lot. Like if we want to search for hiking gear or something like that, which is pretty nice. But I still want to make some of those changes just to make it a little bit better. And obviously for you, I skipped a bunch off of the video, but in part what you could do then is you could just go to the repo and you can copy this and ask Claude all of the difference between these things, because for whatever reason, I had to go back and forth to get this right. Whereas when I was testing it, it worked the first time. So I don't know. Some things change, and that's where AI agents aren't always perfect. But nevertheless, we now have a pretty cool way to query our links, and it wasn't really that much work. So we're nearly there. All we need to do now is add a hybrid search, which does both the BM25 full text search, the one we've been working on. I went ahead off the video and added this as a backup. I also want to then crawl that data. So we add something, we crawl it, then we can search it, then we can also do the vector search. Now we just need to combine the two, and that's pretty much it. So the way this is going to work then is we are going to grab the documentation for this, which is really just combining these two methods in the documentation itself. So feel free to do a quick search for this. But the idea then is let's go ahead and do the hybrid search. So I'm going to go ahead and close out whatever Claude session I'm on, and we'll go ahead and do this where let's create the hybrid search with PG text search and vector search. There we go. And so in theory, it will open this up and it will go through the process and make that happen. Now in our code base, we already have both of those things. So in many ways, it will just work off of what's that and then it will go ahead and start that hybrid search for us. It says it has a clear picture of the implementation, and now it's going to go ahead and combine the things that we've already done. No surprises there. Just like that, hybrid search is implemented, and I would imagine it works, but things went off the rails before. The thing is, it's really just combining two methods, so it's not really that much different than what we already did. So if we now do a simple TARS search for Python and web framework database, something like that, to me, this is like, hey, this should be Postgres, but who knows? We'll see what ends up happening here. And so Django, of course, is the top one. That actually does make sense. Python next up. That's okay as far as the relevance is concerned. And then finally, we've got Postgres right there. And then we've got the timescale AI stuff. I think a big part of the reason this is the case is because this happens to be an actual Python project itself. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff as far as the search engine is concerned. But at this point, I actually want to go ahead and say something along the lines. I'll let it commit. I'll go ahead and open up a new window, and we'll navigate into our dev folder here, and then we'll jump into that search engine again. And what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and add a bunch of links that will maybe show the power of hybrid search. Okay, and so now I'll just let Claude sort of decide how can we really show this thing super powerful. And maybe it'll be like, let's do like 100 links. And they shouldn't all be in tech, right? Something like that. So far, it looks like they're all in tech, which might actually be okay, but I'll let it keep going. So this is why we use the AI agents. It's going to just do all sorts of stuff for us. Now, this is sort of simulating as if I was curating it, right? And that's actually how I want to use this, as a way to curate the stuff that I'm interested in and then do the searches that I want to search, not necessarily these random ones. But the cool thing about using the AI agent is this is going to help refine how this application ends up working with the tools that are available out there. I think that's pretty great. On the other Claude agent, I'm going to go ahead and proceed the commits that it was trying to do with some of those changes, just to make sure that those are on GitHub so you can use it at any time. But yeah, I'll let these actual searches finish off. At this point, it's added a lot. So I'm going to start also the crawl process because this might take a little bit of time. Now, realize if you're doing this as well, if you're copying what I'm doing, this is going to do the embeddings, which might end up adding up in terms of cost. I don't think it's going to cost that much, but it's possible that it could. And that's kind of the point. That's why I wanted to mention that, just so you're aware of it while you do this process. The thing that wouldn't cost that much is the actual pulling the data. It's just the embedding part that could end up adding up if that's how it ends up being. But the reason I'm doing these things sort of side to side is because, well, it's going to be searching all of these links, and I might as well start actually building out the database itself. And I'm noticing that I'm getting 404 pages. Why is that happening? Well, that's because Claude's making up these links. In some cases, it knows about them. In other cases, it doesn't. In this case, it's got a few that it just simply doesn't know about, even though it thinks it does, which is fine. But overall, what we'll end up seeing is that there's a bunch of different things in here now. So once it's going through, I'll say I have another thing crawling them. Now I need some queries to handle this. But first, create a like sample run.md with all of the links and some good queries. Something like that. I realize maybe some of that was cut off, but having this will then allow for me to then redo all of this, right? To bring it back, to actually let you see it or to try it in a really quick way altogether. I don't know if this will end up working exactly the way I want it to, but I'll let it do what it needs to make it work. I think it will end up doing that. It's a lot of 404 pages. So maybe I should have done a different method for scraping a bunch of things than just having Claude make stuff up, basically. But it's okay. We'll leave it as is, and I'll go ahead and say make sure the samples did not have a 404 error, something like that. That way it's not doing silly things. I should probably update it also where TARS itself doesn't attempt to do any embeddings on 404 pages or just simply pages that don't have content, which I would imagine, or I would guess, that the ones that don't have content, it already is not trying to do embeddings on. That's at least my hope. Nevertheless, we'll go ahead and let this finish off. All right, so it added a bunch of links. There were some errors here and there that I had Claude clean up, but now we've got something where it's simply TARS search, and then we should be able to do a Python web framework and do a quick search on that. Now, what I also did with this was I added a few other frameworks in there. Like if we look in here, we've got the Bottle web framework, we have Flask, we've got a few other ones in there. And so if I do a quick search for that, ideally all of those come up. But right now, Bottle's in there. It is listed, but it doesn't show it. So what that means then is I probably need to run TARS crawl, which will be only a handful of links in here. We've got Ruby on Rails, which of course isn't a Python web framework, but it is a web framework. So in that case, maybe it will surface up a little bit in that query. And so what we got here now is we've got a little bit of a crawl. Once we do that, then we do our embeddings, which of course it's doing automatically because of the things that have changed. So all of these changed from their settings. And so now what I should be able to do is run that search again. Now it should be a lot more narrow of results. It might still have other ones that are still somewhat relevant, but it should be better results itself. We've got Django, we've got Flask, we've got Bottle, we have Python there above Fast API, which is interesting. Ruby on Rails, again, a web framework. Next.js, again, a web framework. Vue, a web framework. Timescale, pg-aiguide, a Python tool for Postgres, which happens to be in a lot of web frameworks. And then, of course, the Angular tutorial as well, also a web framework. So, yeah, it's definitely working. If I were to search web framework, and just like that, that should probably give me even more related to just web framework. I wonder what goes first. I'm kind of curious about that, given this results. Django is first, so maybe Django is the most optimized for it, or it's just going off of the fact that so much of our data has Python in it. I don't know. Nevertheless, we now have really great semantic search. So if I do this with Python web framework for Python and generating HTML templates or something like that, maybe we would end up seeing Django. Maybe we'll see Django with something else. But the point here is, Bottle, interesting. So Bottle came up first, which is kind of cool. So maybe Bottle is a really good choice, something would be worth looking at in terms of an actual web framework itself. That's not really the point here. The point is that we have a robust way to add our links, scrape them, turn them into embeddings, and make it possible to search. A very powerful way to do that. In a moment, we're going to start building out a web user interface for our project here. Now, before we do that, let's talk about why we didn't start there. As a user and a developer and someone who likes using the internet, this is traditionally how I would have started. Let's build out that user interface so you can really get that tangible thing going. But the reason we don't do that anymore is because of AI agents. See, command line tools, as you may know, are primitives. These are the things that all software has run on for a very long time. They start at the command line. So our AI agents already do command line things really well without needing a bunch of extra modern tooling like an MCP server, for example, or an AI agent skill. These are things that you can absolutely add. But if I went into Claude right now and said something like use TARS to add and then some link, hit enter, this will most likely work really well. Now, at this point, I'm inside of the location for this, so maybe I would have to add a few other things. But what we see right here is it automatically does this. And now we'll go and say use TARS to crawl, and then it'll just run. And again, calling it TARS, this is not something that's necessarily common knowledge or something that's used all the time, where something like a search engine would be in many ways, right? So if you said use a search engine to add this, then it would probably try to pull up your web browser or something along those lines. Now, so I'm trying to stack the favor in our odds that the AI agent knows what we're doing. And so creating a command line tool on our local machine at the very least will help a lot with that. And I think the more unique you name it, the better. And so you'll see this with all sorts of things, and it's pretty cool that it already knows, hey, search this right here, which is pretty cool, so we can do that search and all that. But now what I want to do is I want to take this a little bit further. And if you actually open up in the terminal a new tab, oftentimes it'll be right inside where you were, so you don't necessarily have to navigate. The reason I don't always do this on a video is because it's a little bit harder to move a tab around without pulling it out, and it makes it harder to follow. So realistically, what I'm going to do is actually close out this old one, and we'll just start a new session. So now I'm going to go back into Claude, and I'm going to start having it develop a plan. This is almost always your first mode of attack. Make a plan so that everything's clear for you and Claude or your AI agent to build it out. And the other thing is making a plan is good for a couple other reasons. One being if you want to use another AI agent at the same time or later, whatever, you'll have a plan available. So here we go. I just wrote this out after, so you don't have to hear me talking and typing at the same time. But overall, the idea here is we're going to make a TARS web to start it. We're going to go ahead and use HTMX for UI elements. That's the front end stuff. You can learn more about it. But instead of building out something like Next.js or React or some sort of heavy JavaScript front end, we're just using HTMX to start. And then you can improve it later if you want to. But overall, the idea here is we've got this right here. That's the key part of it. And now it's going to go ahead and make a plan for multiple agents to build it at the same time. Multiple agents at the same time. Great. So I'll go ahead and run this. What Claude will do, or have the ability to do once it's all done, is to just start implementing this plan. The big reason that I wanted to create this was so that the plan itself will be able to be put into our GitHub repo. Much like our spec file, which maybe we have things on here that we could get rid of at this point. I don't have all of the things that I might want on the actual spec file, but I think I've got a lot of it. So the spec file is now out of spec. It's now incorrect. So that might be another thing that I end up changing on here. But for now, I'll let this actually finish and see what happens. There is one more thing that I want to mention. I see that it's looking in docs. There's a good chance that through this process, we've lost one of the core elements, which was creating markdown files of the searched items. Maybe it's doing it, maybe it's not. I haven't checked up until this point, and what if I look in here inside of docs, it's not doing it. So all it's doing right now is crawling and then storing it into the database, which is probably absolutely fine. But what you might want to do is actually build this out where it's actually local. It's not something I'm going to do at this point, but I do know that that thread was sort of lost because we were building all of these other things. This is where creating plans and really being specific about what it is that you want becomes more important overall. But as you build, some things just that you thought might be important are no longer important. And so adjusting is totally great. That's what you should be doing. Not sticking to a plan that just doesn't make sense anymore, or just doesn't work. This is more important than ever because AI agent tools will start to disrupt your plan as you talk about it. And so these old markdown files, a lot of times I'll just delete them completely. Like, hey, make a new spec, remove the old one, update sample run, those sorts of things. Update Claude, update agents. Those are things that I definitely do over time. Okay, so the plan is all done. I'll go ahead and say yes, go ahead and do this plan, and let's see what it ends up doing here. We've got caching with Postgres itself for the hybrid search. This was something that I thought would be a good idea to really speed that thing up, especially for asking the same thing over and over. And ideally, the caching itself, it looks like it has a 1 hour time to live, which is great. Maybe we want it longer, maybe we want it less, or maybe we want to update the cache when we add new links, which maybe it already does that. But now that we've got this, we've got a plan that we could review. And what I would often do now, I don't see the plan in here. There it is. So what I would do now often is I would take this to other AI agents and say, what do you think about this plan? And basically you can assume that the TARS like CLI is up and working, like all of the things it depends on are working, which this doesn't really show. So there's two ways that we could also think about doing this as well. We could deploy TARS as an actual package so that then the other agents can review that as well, or you could just send them to the GitHub repo I've told you about. But at this point, we've now have, can you start this with parallel agents? You could do this a couple different ways, right? So the first one is you could just tell the next plans what's going on. This can do 10 agents at one time, which is pretty cool. So what I would say is, unless you have the Claude Max plan, what you would do then is you would go ahead and navigate back into your project, right? So navigate to the search engine project all around, open up your new agent. So I'll go ahead and do Claude, and I'll go ahead and say something like this. You are agent 1 for this, get to work. Then open up a new tab, Claude, and then you are agent 2 for this, get to work. Right? And so now it's going to go through this process to do everything there. This, I think, is a really good way to do that multiple agent planning, and then also consider using other tools like Codex, like AMP. There's a lot of other AI agent tools that are out there that you can consider using in this process after you have them review the plan and make their own adjustments as they see fit. So there we go. You could also do it in full send mode and just have Claude do it, right? That's totally fine as well. But the point being is we now have a process for planning a new feature, a major new feature, which would be this web interface, and we do it incrementally. We don't just bring everything out all at once. I think there's a lot of flaws to making that happen, where you just try to one-shot everything and just make it good. I'll let this finish, and then we'll look at the actual UI in just a moment. All right, so after a little bit of time, few minutes, I was able to have all 10 agents complete all of their work, and now we've got all of this stuff, and I should be able to start a server. So let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and run tars web and then -- open like it says. Then I get this error, right? And so I want to make sure that those things are working correctly, which is why I'm telling this. This is where maybe I need to put something in claude.md or agents.md to always do this, right? To always install the things. I'm sure I've mentioned that before, but this is like even more obvious now when we add new stuff. But let's go ahead and see. There it goes. It still didn't work. Okay, I'm going to copy that again and see what happens. UV sync is not the right one. It's global. So let's go ahead and say this is a global issue, not local. And let's see if that fixes. And there we go. So now it's saying that. Do it. I don't know why this is still happening. Actually, I do know why. I don't have any rules for it to follow for this specifically. Okay, but now that that's done, hopefully we've got it working. There we go. So tars web is going on that, port and everything. Wow, this is pretty cool. And so it's giving me options even for the hybrid search, which is pretty interesting, like how to weight these things out. Let's go ahead and say a web framework for Django and just do a quick little search here. Doesn't seem like it's giving me any results. It seems like it's searching, but there we go. We've got an error. So let's go back into our main item here and give it the error. I'll go back and forth to get the errors done in a moment, but look at this user interface. This is pretty cool. More errors. It's pretty funny that there's still certain things that are just missing. I'm not sure why these things are missing exactly, but they're missing nonetheless, in which case I'll go ahead and do something like this, grab these broken links here. Obviously, I could write a bunch of this stuff out, but the 404s not found are part of the issue. Why 404 errors, right? That's it. And then you'll just go back and forth until that's solved. So I keep getting errors here, which now what I want to do is open up a new one and bring in Claude. So I'm still in the same location for my project, as you can see right here. run tars web and fix all issues. Use the, what do we call it? The Playwright MCP to verify it's working globally too, not just the local version of tars. So another added benefit of having the command line already working is that we've already seen the logic part of this part working, right? We just don't have the user interface really fully working. It was sort of working, but it's just not fully working, right? So this is interesting right here. So let's go ahead and just do Python web framework here, hit enter and see what happens. I still get nothing. And so now it opened up Chrome for me and it's going to go through this process on its own. I might need to grant it some access to do it, but here we go. And so this is a reason to have Playwright installed beyond just scraping things, but to actually verify any sort of user interface you're going to build out. And so what we can see here is there's a 500 error on search. Let me check the server logs. 500 error is something's wrong with the server. 404 is not always going to clearly say that. That's just something that's just sort of web related. But if we give it the ability to solve these problems, then it'll just continuously do it, hopefully until it's actually working correctly. After a little bit of back and forth with some errors, the web page now works. And it does it in a way that's pretty cool. So you can actually share this with yourself or something where it's actually going to go ahead and redo that same exact search by just pasting it into the browser. And so there we go. Here's our results here. This is pretty nice. And so when I click on something, obviously it's going to come up and it's going to open those things. Maybe at this point, I might want to add in the feature of like star or push up or upvote, because maybe the keyword and vector, those are great, but they're maybe not my personal results. In which case, hey, that might be, we build out user interface and do all sorts of stuff with that. But for now, I think this is pretty great. And so we can also go ahead and see the crawl aspect. We could start a crawl, make sure that that's going. I think everything's already crawled, so we're good there. Next, let's go ahead and add in a new link and see if this part works. This is pretty cool also. Let's go ahead and grab something like from Hacker News. So we'll go into news.y Combinator and we'll look at Moltbook. Hey, what do you know? A social network for AI agents. That's silly, but maybe interesting. So there we go. I added this link and I don't see anything about it. So maybe that's not great. I don't know. But we could probably take a look at this. There it is right there. Maybe we need a detail view. It says pending, so I'm not sure what all these pendings mean exactly. But of course, we could go through that and ask about it. I would guess that it's just something that's incorrect. You know, I don't know. So that would be another question of like, what is the pending here? It's all pending, right? And so again, you go back and forth and just kind of get these things working and working correctly. But there we go. We now have a user interface. It took a little time to get us here because there's so much back and forth. But imagine just trying to come out of the gates and do this directly. Our search engine started as a general purpose tool in the command line. Then we modified it to work as a web interface so that humans can use it. Now we're going to move into an MCP tool so that AI agents or just AI tooling in general has a very standardized way of using it as well. The command line itself is standardized as well, so you don't necessarily need to use MCP if you have the command line tool, but knowing how to do it can be really useful, especially as your tool starts to grow and maybe you want only certain features available to the MCP or some that are not available. And so that's what we're going to do now using Fast MCP. This will also show us how to add our own MCP or any MCP to Claude in this case. So the way this is going to work is if you go to the code.claude.com/docs, you're going to look for adding a remote HTTP server to MCP. This has changed a number of times over the years, or over the year. But the idea overall is we want to actually add our own MCP. So the idea here is we actually do Claude MCP add transport HTTP. This is probably going to change over time. We give it a name and we add the URL. And so you see an example right there. And so the reason we're going to be doing this is because initially we'll start off by using the fast MCP so that we can just build this better using what's built off of their actual documentation and all that. Granted, you go to the docs route and download the docs and do all that sort of stuff as well, but I'm going to go off of what they have here. So go ahead and copy that. We'll jump into Claude here and we'll do Claude MCP add, and then transport is going to be HTTP, which I think should just be the default personally, but I'll leave it as is. Then we'll go ahead and do fast MCP here as the name, and then the actual location. Again, if you look in the docs, that's what we've got. We basically just did this right here. You just need to add your name and the location, and I'll hit enter. Okay, and so now we've got this. Let's go ahead and open up Claude, and let's go ahead and say let's make a MCP version of this search engine CLI and web app. Something like that. And I think if everything was done correctly, if the MCP actually works, then it should hopefully actually build this out for us using fast MCP, even though I haven't said anything about it to do so. So I'll let this go and we'll kind of work through this together. A big part of the reason I didn't work through the web app with you together is because there's so much to the web app that already exists. That's already super well documented. MCP, on the other hand, is still relatively newer, but the idea is that Claude may or may not know how to actually build these things out, even with this MCP docs here. I have really high confidence that it does, but that's why we work through it together, is to just make sure that we think through some of the different features about this and how we might actually want to build out our MCP server itself. Great, so right off the bat, it found the MCP documentation. I didn't have to direct it. So I'd imagine a lot of tooling will come out where we end up seeing stuff like this. Now, one of the downsides of having a bunch of MCP servers is how it fills up your context window inside of your chat. So you might not necessarily want to do this, or maybe after you build out the MCP, maybe then you remove it, in which case you would want to look like remove the MCP server like that, so that it's not always available, because you could always add it back later. So with this in mind, I'll just go ahead and let it start this process for how to build these things out. I think it's still just making a plan. I'll go ahead and say yes. And let's go ahead and say, ensure the plan is to be built by multiple agents at once. You could say in parallel as well, but I'll keep that there and let that part finish as well. Okay, so it finished. It had a bunch of different new things to add. I don't think it has to overview or redo a bunch because we already have a lot of the implementation. So I think really it's just reusing stuff. And of course we could dive into it more. I think it's ready. Now, oftentimes you'll see this like clear context and accept edits because it automatically makes a plan for Claude. I think the agent tools, all agent tools are starting to do this as well. So every once in a while, whenever I see this, I'll go, yes, first make, something like at mcpplan.md before starting. So I almost always say, hey, I want it on my local project. That's not for everybody, of course. But once you have it, you've got your web plan, and then we have our MCP plan. This will help us keep it in track, but then also be able to deploy it to our GitHub, right? So if we ever need to make changes and stuff like that, it's all well documented there. One of the downsides of potentially doing this would be to just have your repo have way too many things going on with it. But at this point, we now see there's the plan, and it's not really that big, so it's probably fine. I'll go ahead and clear and accept edits. So I think what it'll do now is actually spin up a few different agents for me. It might not, but do that same process again if you want to, or go one by one and just kind of get these things working. So once it ends up being done, then hopefully we'll be able to start testing out our own MCP for this. I'm going to go back and forth, solve any errors that come up like we've seen before. But overall, we're now at a place where maybe we can start building out this MCP. So with this plan in mind, I don't know if I will need the fast MCP going while it's being built, because the plan is already kind of there. So maybe we need it, maybe not. I don't know if it's actually going to need to connect to it. But very soon, once we get our own TARS MCP, I'm going to remove it because we don't need it any longer. I would add it again later for another project if need be. Now it says that it's done, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that I never have to use environment variables. So when installing anywhere, I don't want to inject environment vars or env vars. Mostly so like this Claude desktop thing is what really brought it up. It was like this right here. I want it to just be in one spot and only TARS has access to that, not needing to do it on the installation. There we go. So there it is. And it looks like it's going to go do this process for the MCP. This is what the web one should already do. I think it already does do that because we tried it out. But there we go. So now we've got this. And then also we have a CLI already. Why do we need the directory? So this is another question of like, hey, it should be in the command line tool to just run the MCP server itself locally. And so these are just things that you would learn over time. But like as soon as I saw that it said command UV, that's not the command. The command is TARS. And then maybe just simply TARS MCP, and then that should work. And so there we go. The command is not TARS MCP like this. Why is it not TARS MCP solo? Why a new command? Something like that. And there we go. So now it's going to run. Once again, it's now saying this. I'm not sure why it's sort of fighting me with these things, right? So subs command is better, great, and so hopefully now it's just going to go based off of where it's actually located. This should not happen either, right? So that should happen where it's located. So again, we're going to let this finish up. Now, one of the reasons why, like the env file, I already noticed this being an issue, is because we don't want to have our env everywhere. We only want it in one location. If I keep putting it all over the place, then we might run into an issue where we accidentally share that .env file, or more specifically expose our command line tool all together, like the actual things that are inside of that .env. We don't want that everywhere. Okay, great. So now we've got something very simple to run, and that's this right here. So this is now how I want to do it, and we want to test this out. So that will be something we will do very, very soon. So the question here would be, how do we actually run this locally? How to add to Claude code directly, considering, let's go ahead and grab the docs for it. I'm going to grab these right here. Something like that. It's not a remote server. So I mean, it's a local one, and here's the local example. So if we look at local here, it says add, and there we go, and there's the command. So hopefully what we see here is it will give me the actual command to run it, not just do this. So let's see what we've got. And it looks like it's making some updates. Great. So that's pretty good. And then we will take a look at this in a second. So it just finished, and it has two modes now. We've got TARS MCP. This is just like the one-off mode. Just run it when it needs to run. So for example, if you install it in like Claude Desktop, you can use just this command, and what that would end up doing, which of course the example is right here, is when you open up Claude Desktop, it will run the different commands for the different MCP servers to see if they work. Or you can just have your server persistent and running all of the time, which is what this is doing. So it's slightly different, but the actual having it run all the time means that you could deploy this and you could use it just like what we saw with FastMCP. So in FastMCP, they have their own server that's running all of the time. If I open this up in the web browser, this is what you end up seeing, right? So we could do that same sort of thing on ours as well. And you can do it by specifying the port and the host these two things right here are really important when you go into production. But for now, what we could do is just see this in action. So let's go ahead and run it. I'll open up a new terminal window here and run this command. In my case, I actually went off the video and made sure that it installed all the things globally and all that. But now we can actually see this actual MCP server working by jumping into that browser right there. And so what I get here is something that's a little bit different than I might expect. Let me go to 8,000 and see what's there. We got nothing. So right now it's showing me this. Maybe I just need to go into this session here. Let's see if that does anything. Invalid content header type. Cool. So it already has some security built in with that. I think FastMCP 3.0 might look a little bit different than this. So just keep that in mind when you go forward. Go ahead and use that version if it's already out. The beta version is, but yeah. Nevertheless, we've got this now working. So it's just a matter of testing this out in the different places. So just remembering that, look at, we can add it to Claude Code like this. So this is if it's running, right? Assuming that it's running, you could then add it to Claude Code like that. If it's not running, Claude will just know it can't access this MCP server and it won't even try to continue to try and do things, which might mean you just create a new session to see if it ends up working. But I actually want to test this in a couple ways in just a moment. All right, let's go ahead and try out the MCP server now. Notice that I'm no longer in the project itself, but rather I should be able to write out tars MCP, and that should actually bring this up for us. So what I want to do here is close that out with Control-C, and I want to add this into Claude. So remembering back to what Claude does to add an MCP server, we've got Claude MCP add, any other options that you might want, like the transport, give it a name, and then some command if that's the way we're going, which is what we are going to do. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here. We'll bring that in, transport stdo, and I'll go ahead and say tars, and this is going to be tars and MCP. If we hit enter, this has now updated this as the MCP Studio here, which is pretty interesting because if we open up Claude directly and we go into the settings and then we go down to developer, edit configuration, and then take a look in here, that's not showing up at all. So this is not for Claude Desktop, it's just for Claude Code. So if we now go into Claude and let's go ahead and say add a random link to tars and hit enter, hopefully what it'll do is what we expect. There it is, tool use. Hey, what do you know? There, it's working. Fantastic. Okay, search in tars for Python web framework. Okay, it added a random link in here. I didn't scrape anything. I didn't do all the automated stuff necessarily, but there we go. Now it's doing the MCP and it's actually working. And so this is actually pretty nice. Of course, this is invoking the local version. So it actually started up that server for us, which might be the way you want to go about doing it, including in Claude Desktop. And so feel free to add both of them. I think you could even use the MCP server as it is and say something like install this in Claude Desktop. We might need to specify what this is, but let's see. Let's see if it does it for us. Super cool. Look at that. I'll help you add tars to Claude Desktop. Let's see what it is. Config is empty. Great. Here it goes. It's going to start this process for us. Now, this, of course, is going to get easier and easier where you don't necessarily have to remember the commands even. You probably could have used Claude Code directly to tell you what command exactly to run to install into Claude Code, which is what I would imagine it would do. I'm going to go ahead and do that now and let this boot up. Once that happens, I might need to restart the Claude Desktop, in which case I will, and I'll open it back up. Oh, wait, it did it on its own. I didn't even tell it to. Look at that. Okay, so I already did that. Okay, and here we go. Jumping in, I get an error here. Okay, so let's see what's going on. Open developer settings, and we got this error. View logs, copy this. I'm going to navigate into my dev folder here, and we'll go ahead and grab the search engine, open up Claude, and during using MCP on Claude desktop, go ahead and add those things in. And so, yeah, it's saying that there's an issue. I'm not quite sure what the issue would be because this doesn't really look like issues to me. But that was just a quick glance. And so I'll let this actually finish and fix this so that we can get it working correctly on our Claude desktop. And naturally, if you don't have Claude desktop installed, just go ahead. I think it's at desktop.claude.com. If it's not, then just go to, I don't know, claude.com, I guess, or claude.ai. Maybe that's where it was, is at the desktop version there. Nevertheless, go ahead and look for that, download it, get it going. Now it looks like it is doing okay. So let's go ahead and close out Claude and let's see if it works again. So when you boot up with any sort of MCP server, it's going to give you an error if there's something wrong, which is what we saw, of course. So it's a good sign. So now that it's here, let's go ahead and say add a link to, let's say CFE for to Claude or to TARS, something like that. This is very vague, but it should know exactly what this means based off of all of the conversations I've had. There it is. And so it's trying to add it to TARS. I can go ahead and hit Shift Enter to run that. And naturally, it's going to start building this out. And we get another error. Okay. So let's see. Oh, nope, it added it. But I get this error here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little screenshot. And then I will grab and drag that screenshot in here and say some odd error. But it seems to have worked. I can't tell what the error is, nor should I necessarily need to know. But really the key here is that now we have this MCP server. You could still go back and forth and solve it, but it makes it really nice because then at any time I could just say on any MCP server, whether it's Claude now or something else in the future, just go ahead and say, add the link to TARS, and then it'll go ahead and do it, right? Whatever the case is. It's already added. Great, it already knew that. Yes, add the CFE GitHub link to TARS. Right? And there we go. So now it's making some other changes to it to make that one error be fixed or something. Nevertheless, there we go. And let's say crawl everything. Cool. And so from here on out, you of course could say ask TARS or something like that. So like ask TARS the best, I don't know, website for learning to code. Let's see what it says here. I'm a little hesitant to necessarily put this on a video because we don't know what's going to happen. But hopefully it actually does use TARS and then it goes through the whole process. So it's like we're getting more errors with TARS itself. Nevertheless, I'll go ahead and see if it does a little search here. Here we go. It does do the search. Let's go ahead and allow it. And let's let it run and see what happens. Okay, phew. Top 5. That's okay. Nevertheless, there's probably only 5. But the important part here is it actually used TARS and it did it as we wanted to. So notice that it wasn't crawled or whatever. So naturally, maybe there's something with Playwright. It's not necessarily working here. So maybe the crawl event needs to happen a little bit differently or asynchronous from being used. In which case, maybe we change how our search function works and all that. But at this point, I think you've got enough to make sure that all of that is up and working. I think this is pretty cool. Hopefully you do as well. Off the video, I went ahead and fixed some bugs so the web scraping process would work in Claude Desktop. But here we go. So I did a very simple session here where I'm like, hey, what are the links of the newest homes on Redfin in Hawaii? This grabs this link right here. To me, this is simulating as if I just added it myself. Or, of course, Claude is doing it for me. Then it goes ahead and tries to grab it, and it's trying to use another MCP web browser to open it up for you, which is an automation that Claude has. But maybe not every LLM has that, and every LLM that's using the MCP has that. but might have a link for it based off of its training. And so what I did then was just say, hey, add it to tars. It added the link to tars, and then I get all this back. And then I told it to crawl it, which it did. Then I said, what are the values for tars that was scraped? So this might be a good place to be like, oh, when I scrape something, what I should respond back with on the MCP is the actual scrape data, not this, right? Not whatever this stuff is. Literally the scrape data may be formulated in a different way, maybe cleaned up. There's a lot of different things we could do in this process right here. But then I went ahead and said that, and then again, it didn't give me the actual scrape data. It just gave me the database entries or the high-level ones, and then I asked for the content directly. This said a lot of data in here that's coming through. I would imagine it doesn't actually have that much in the first scraping. That's probably just on the first page, which is probably only a handful. But the idea is then I asked for the full contents of the scrape page, which it gives me this, which is just a lot of like flat data. It doesn't really give me a whole lot. Then I asked it to turn that scrape data into a CSV file, which it did. And here is this CSV file. Now, I am not positive if these things are correct. I would imagine they probably are. We've gotten to a place where that's often going to be the case. So what I would do then is if I was going to modify tars, I would say, hey, we need to make sure that when we do a scraping like this, it is in this format and it's going one by one. And more specifically, we need to make sure that we're getting the link for each one of these things so that then you can scrape the link directly for any given listing and you'd be able to grab that actual data and build out a CSV file like this. This CSV file, of course, you could put it somewhere as you see fit as well. Now, do keep in mind, not everything can be scraped this way, and probably not everything should be. But in the case of like real estate investment, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to actually go through that process. And what we see down here is, the CSV has 41 listings of the 7,000. So it's obviously not comprehensive. It's only a few, but it still serves the purpose of like what it is that we can build from here. We can do a lot more things, and it's sort of a companion to what you would be doing with a chat anyway. What I think would make it even more powerful is if everyone on your team had access to the exact same tars and could add links and all of that. And then you might expand the scope as to what it needs to do to make sure all of this is working. But yeah, I think it's actually pretty cool and could be a fundamental tool that you use in your work or in your business. It's pretty neat. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. Now, to me, this idea of tracking links is incredibly compelling. Now, on one hand, yeah, the web scraping part of it is also compelling, but if you were to start tracking all of the things that catch your attention in terms of the link, and then eventually build out this huge database of all the links that really have caught your eye, well, that might be something really, really interesting. Now you add the crawling into the mix and then maybe turning it into vector embeddings. Now we're talking about a knowledge base, a very personalized knowledge base based off of all the things that catch your attention. This is something that, of course, a lot of these big businesses, these big social media companies are doing all of the time. They're tracking what things you share. You might as well do it as well. And now that we can turn it into a search engine because of PG text search, we have an unprecedented ability to really start making a knowledge base of our own personal stuff. And maybe that means that we do our job better. Maybe that means we find a new job. Maybe that means we build a new business. It could mean a whole lot of things. And that is why I'm so excited about this idea. Me personally, I actually have a text message bot that does much of the same. I send it a link and then it tracks that link. Down the line, I will start actually scraping that data or pulling that data and start making sense of it for it to do something. But realistically, it's all about that link. You'll see this all over the place, all over the internet, which of course, Google, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, all of these places are all around building out these links. And then of course, the ones that don't allow you to share links, well, you can share links to those posts most of the time. I'm looking at you, Instagram. But overall, this idea here is we can actually build out all sorts of really cool things now that PG text search exists. So huge thanks to Tiger Data for open sourcing that and making it easy for all of us to jump up and start using it for free. Granted, I did partner with them, so thanks for doing that as well. But the idea here is we now have a very practical way to have our own personalized search engine, and I couldn't be more excited. My name is Justin Mitchell. Thanks so much for being here. Look forward to seeing you next time when we build maybe on top of this. If you want to see that, please let me know by commenting below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks again.